Today's guest is Alex Shartsis, the CEO of Skyp, that's SKYP. He explains why micro campaigns beat mass outreach every time and why your leads might be the 100 people in that closed loss column of your CRM. He also shares what to do when your email platform's deliverability is garbage, and if you stay to the end, he tells us who really owns churn in a SaaS company. Stick around. Today's guest, we have Alex Shartsis. He is the CEO and founder of a company called Skyp that is doing really cool things with micro campaigns. And I want to dig into that a little bit today, Alex, as well, and kind of define what that is. But in a previous life, you built and sold Perfect Price. So that's another thing that I think would be great to dig into. This was an AI dynamic pricing company that raised some money. And then I believe you had an exit, and you worked at Open Door doing like acquisition stuff as well. And I think that would have been probably some really fascinating stories coming out of that world. You also have a newsletter called Seed to Sequoia. I know you've got thousands of people watching what you're talking about there, talking about go-to-market challenges that you've found as a founder, kind of doing all of the things, right? And I think, with Retain or Die, we're really focused on that post-sale. But I think where I know I've had a lot of learnings is things that you do ahead of the sale, like pricing, like onboarding, et cetera, have a lot of impact on what retention really looks like for your customers. So welcome to Retain or Die. It's really great to have you on.
Awesome. Super excited to be here.
Is there anything else that I missed in that brief intro that you'd like to share?
Other than my adult softball career, no, you nailed it.
Oh,
that's it. And that didn't make LinkedIn, so.
Shame. Why not? I feel like everyone needs a hobby.
Because my wife says I talk about it too much, so she no more attention on adult softball.
That's great. Is that an ongoing career, or are you retired?
It is. It's. I mean, I'm actually pretty early. You can play. There's a league in Florida. They play in their late 80s, so I feel like I'm at the beginning of my adult softball career.
Your tenure is just getting started. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Let's dive into Skyp. I'm curious to learn more about the origin story of this company, and in particular, why you're building what you're building.
Yeah, I know. And actually it fits with the Retain or Die theme, I think, pretty well, because it's a very low retention industry, or so I'm told by other people who know. So as you mentioned, I have consulted with founders for years after having been one and been early on the GTM front in a bunch of companies. And one of the things I saw as a pattern was you always need to do outbound. Every founder has to do outbound. I'm sure, Peter, you've done outbound, or somebody on your team has. But whether it's reaching out to 50 VCs or maybe hundreds, reaching out to early customers, there's just so many use cases for it. And so as I advised founders for a while, I realized that we kept coming back to this one issue. I ended up building out a team to do that for people because I'd recommend it, and then they'd do a bad job. They'd either hire an agency that wasn't very good, or they'd try and DIY it without really knowing how to write a good email or how to set up a good campaign. And in the meantime, the landscape shifted a lot, where it just became much, much harder to get emails open, to get emails into an inbox, to get emails through a spam filter, to get somebody to click on them. Like it used to be much easier 5-10 years ago. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I think in part driven by AI tools, it's just become much harder. So I realized that these founders, every founder I worked with, needed to do this task. It started with the micro campaign, reaching out to 50 possible customers or 20 VCs or 20 angel investors. And then eventually it ends up at scale, where you're hopefully not reaching out to thousands of investors, but you're at least reaching out to thousands of potential customers. And that's where we had the idea. My co-founder and I kind of came to the idea from different angles, but we ended up fixating on this. How do you do outbound using AI really efficiently for a founder and potentially small sales teams?
So I think right now, if you spend too much time on LinkedIn like I do, you'll see a lot of content about, Clay comes up all the time. It's like, how can you send mass personalized emails? You'll see companies talk about it. We send 10 million emails. And I don't know, something about that doesn't sit well with me.
Living the dream. I started a company to send millions of emails. I think nobody starts their company to send like, oh, I'm gonna start a company to help people with retention, and my goal is to send 10 million emails a month. Like, it's not. Anyway, I think it's sort of a byproduct of like, just you have to get stuff done, and it's a way to get stuff done. It's a way to fill the top of funnel. I think of email marketing the way that company would do it as just another digital channel. Probably the highest performing, lowest cost per lead digital channel. So when you have an ICP that's like Starlink, like anybody on the planet who needs internet, right, that has $80 a month to spend on it, or Comcast, or any of these sort of mass market things, like, yeah, you can send millions of emails. You can build a funnel that way. I think that's viable. And I would think about it as just another digital channel. That's also true if you're a SaaS company. I mean, if you're a SaaS company and you have a sort of total addressable market of 10 or 20,000 companies, maybe with 5 possible buyers at each one, right? That's 50, 100,000 people. You can send emails to them. You could spend a few years sending it with people changing jobs and leaving and being hired. Like you could probably, just treat that as like, oh, we spent $10,000 on LinkedIn ads and we spent $10,000 sending emails. And my bet is the emails are going to outperform the LinkedIn ads.
Yeah.
But I think that where we're starting is these micro campaigns where it's still personal. So I think AI's made it really easy to personalize an email, like, oh, hey, Peter, I see you're from Australia or you work at startups or there's a million things that one can personalize it with. They can download your podcast transcripts and, oh, I see you had Alex Shartsis on your podcast last week. That was great, right? And some of that stuff rings true and some of it doesn't. What I've found is that the stuff that's always been most effective, even before AI, is stuff that's relevant to your business. Like, oh, hey, Peter, I saw you have a podcast that got 100 listens last week. Do you want to get it to 1,000, right? Or I saw you have a podcast with 10,000 listens. Do you want a guest speaker? Like stuff that's like actually relevant to what that person's selling versus just like a statement of fact that makes it look personal. I think the old model of show me, you know me was what that was called, where it's like, oh, I listened to your podcast and therefore you feel compelled to respond to my email because I put some effort into it, has died because it's obviously AI. Like nobody actually listens to anybody's podcast when they're doing cold outreach. They just have the AI listen to it and then like, hey, ChatGPT, quote everybody's podcast, right? And so I think it's almost a negative indicator. What used to be a positive indicator has become a negative indicator. But I think that the key insight we have is that there's a difference between sending 1 million or 10 million emails a month or a year, whatever that scale is, and sending 100. But the human doesn't want to spend any more time sending 100, right? Like you can launch that 1 million email campaign pretty quickly. Like tools like ours, other tools out there, like you can get that stood up in a few hours, depending on your structure. You want the same thing for that conference follow-up, right? Or the conference outreach before you go, right? And so that workflow remains a pain point for founders and for small sales teams, even if they are sending 10 million emails as a mass campaign.
I think that's where I was going to go with it, was that sort of, I see you went to college in Massachusetts and, it's like that surface level sort of, it's like so easy to scrape LinkedIn and tell me, the three things that you know about me.
You used to actually have to log into LinkedIn and go look. And like, that's why that was so effective, because it's like, oh, this guy like really cares about me. He spent time. Now it's like, oh, this guy told a bot to go do some scraping. And,
It's interesting to me that, so I said before that like the sending 10 million emails thing doesn't sit well with me necessarily, because I know I've seen those campaigns, and I as much as everyone talks about personalization, I know I've been on the receiving end of a lot of these that it's not personal, and it's just
it's like the opposite of personal.
It's like
industrialized personal.
It's so strange to me that like that has become just common now and so easy to do that has become like the red flag that you look for. It's like, oh, my name, weird, things about me that I know I've published online somewhere. Yeah. What are you
so
up
you're
to?
Clearly you're clearly not a human.
You're clearly not a human behind this. So I think that's the question that I would have is like, how are you building Skip in a way that kind of addresses that, right? Where you're going a bit deeper than that.
Right. Well, I think it's funny, we built out the system that would like look at LinkedIn and look at whoever you're sending to's LinkedIn and try and find things to talk about. And it just sounded like cheesy AI. There was no way we could get it to a point where it just didn't sound like cheesy AI. And so we went back to first principles, which is really short emails, really clear value proposition, focus on the customer's pain and the customer's language around that pain. I think a lot of it has to do with the founder or the sales team having a really tight ideal customer profile, because this is where it ties back into the retain or die thing. Like a lot of the companies in the space send tens of thousands of emails, and they might actually get some meetings out of it, although some don't. And then they don't turn into customers. Eventually the company's customers churn, because they're like, yeah, I spent 50 grand with you over the last several months and you sent billions of emails and I don't have any new business. Like I can't justify spending 50 grand if I'm not going to get new business. And so a big part of it is just, back to first principles, short emails, on point, focus on the value prop and the pain points that you deliver on. And fundamentally, no amount of personalization is going to get somebody to buy a service they don't need or have no interest in buying. I
feel like that's especially true these days. I know it's a ridiculous thing to say. It's like these days. We live through these days all the time. But it does feel like it's a particularly hard time to get people's attention and share of their budget.
Yeah, the budget thing's interesting. So I talked to VCs about this space, which is always interesting because sometimes VCs are super useful and sometimes they're not. I think for founders listening to this, I think it's really important to kind of put it in a box and be like, it's one input, right? You got this big model of how you think the world works and how your product fits into it. And VC input is not, it's not like they have the cheat code. Like they're just one more input in this larger thing. And a lot of them don't like, well, they obviously spent tens of millions of dollars investing in the space a year and a half ago because they thought it was super exciting. What's interesting is like those companies are still performing pretty well, but VCs have kind of soured on the space because it's so easy to stand one up, as like me and my co-founder have proved. Like we have one, we've been working on it for a few months. So VCs, obviously their motivation is different, but in talking to them, the biggest thing in the space is high churn and retaining clients, because what happens is these companies come in and make all these promises and then they don't deliver, right? Oh yeah. Spend 10 grand a month with us and we'll set up all your emails and you'll get 50 leads a month, right? To what you said before, right? Like acquisition is easy when it's a clear value prop. It's an easy decision to be like, yeah, if I put $10,000 in the machine and I get 50 leads out, like I know what the leads are worth, right? It's way more than $10,000. Like it becomes easier to make that purchase decision. But then retention becomes a problem when the leads don't materialize. So 2 or 3 months later, you're like, wait a minute, like you sent 8, I was expecting 50. Like I can pay $10,000 for 50, but like 8 is not enough for me to either spend the money or waste the time, or maybe both, right? And so I think what's interesting about this space is like, how do you solve that retention problem? Is it endemic to the category, or is it, because there's some categories that are just higher churn than others, like dating, right? Dating is a famous example of like, if you do a good enough job on a dating app, people churn out because they meet somebody and they don't need a dating app anymore. Is that the case here, where it's like, oh, you do a good or bad job on email and they, I don't know, get enough customers, exhaust the market? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think the exhausting the market one is a complaint that I've heard a lot. Is like basically if you burn through your TAM in a month, and then what?
Well, yeah, and that's where micro campaigns come in. Is I think early on, any founder that's trying to build something for everybody is doomed. Like you have to focus on a narrow, whether it's people that rent out their couches or on Airbnb or just books. Like you've got to focus somewhere, even if your vision's much bigger. And I think early on, if you spend too much time talking to VCs, you end up talking only about like the big vision, but like really it's about executing on this narrow serviceable market and talking about this, look at Elon, right? It's like, oh, we're going to have self-driving cars everywhere. It's like, yeah, that's nice, right? But he shipped a Roadster, like not even that many of them to begin with. That's a micro market. It's a micro campaign, right? That's where the sort of micro campaign notion comes from, is that you need to focus on your early market. I mean, the whole idea behind micro campaigns is early on, you need to be targeted, right? And if you're a lot of companies, they're great businesses that are 5-10 million dollars a year in ARR revenue that sell to 1,000 companies, right? Or sell to 2,500 companies. And if you plug those into one of these AI SDR tools that sends thousands and thousands of emails, it's not going to work. Like you'll burn through your whole market in 4 weeks. Then
yeah. And so I'd love to dig into this from your point of view as someone building in this space and like thinking about retention, right? So something that strikes me about a lot of AI companies in particular is churn seems like the biggest concern, where especially with, if you're building on top of certain models, it's who cares what model's behind it, right? As long as what you are putting out into me is valuable, you can have any LLM in the background as long as the output's good. So as far as the models are concerned, I feel like people are just bouncing all over the place. But as someone building a product with AI baked in, I'm not calling you like a flash in the pan AI product, but someone who's thinking about a space, you're entering a space where churn is kind of an issue if you're not delivering results. And even if you are, like there's always going to be these flashy new things that pop up like every single week. Just feels like constantly someone new building in the space. How are you thinking about that post-sales journey for your customers? What are you doing to keep them around?
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of things about both how we do it and I think sort of the quote unquote right way to do it. I think first, it very much depends on who you put into the top of the funnel, right? Like if you're signing up people that haven't figured out their marketing, in our case, don't know their ICP, don't have budget, or are spending their lunch money, right? Or just, those people are high risk of churn. And so it doesn't matter how great your product is or how good your execution is. If it's like, look, I'm going to give you my last $1,000 and I need 5 customers out of it, you're signing yourself up for churn. I think that the flip side is, if you just sell results, and I saw this with the pricing company, if you're just selling results, you put yourself in this high anxiety, high churn mindset where if the only reason I'm using your software is to get this result, it's not doing a job, right? You've sort of taken on all of the ownership of doing that job to too great of an extent. You end up, as soon as you don't deliver the result, it's a sort of, I call it the what have you done for me lately problem. Like you end up, as soon as you don't deliver the result, people are like, oh, I'm done, right? I don't need this anymore. It's not doing a job for me on the day-to-day. It's not part of the furniture. It's not part of my workflow. It's this like thing off to the side. The classic example is ad network. I used to help start a KP Sequoia-backed ad network, and you go in and you could sign a $250,000 deal in 2 weeks, right? But the second that you didn't deliver, they'd turn it off. And they might just turn it off because their budget changed or their priorities changed or whatever. But it was really easy to get customers, but it was also really easy to lose customers because it wasn't part of their workflow. It was just this thing that's out to the side. So to answer your question, we view it as a job to be done, right? This isn't like, a machine where you put in money and you get out leads. It fits this piece of the job to be done where you as a human have a lot of control and want agency over it. And so whether you're using it to do investor outreach or whether your investor is using it to reach out to CEOs, whether you're, just running regular marketing campaigns to thousands of people through it, we're very clear on like what we do and what we don't do. And we're very clear about like, look, you might get great results, you might not get great results, but it's about how you use it, right? And here are the tips. I mean, to that point, yeah, it does matter a little bit which model you use because the quality of the emails, the quality of the copy will be different. And so we've obviously optimized. Eventually we'll let users choose. So your average user who doesn't really have strong opinions can show up and have a good experience and get good emails. Your power user who's like playing around with Clay and has 15 different integrations in Zapier and is, all these AI things. And like, I mean, we talked to one the other day who's using it. He's like, oh, can I take my custom trained ChatGPT model and use it with the email writing because it knows a bunch of stuff? And it's like, that seems like something we should support, right? I mean, if you're that sort of into the space, there's a risk that it underperforms our models, right? There's a risk that like the way we've set up the prompting in the models is better than that. But if that's the job you want to do, okay, like why not, right? And then at that point, it's like, oh, well, yeah, there's 5 other new ones, but this is the one that integrated my stuff. And this is the one that I'm going to keep using because I've fine-tuned it, right? My fingerprints are all over it. It does it the way I want. Anybody can show up and say, oh, we'll outperform that one. But like, it's not about just the pure performance. It's also about the job to be done where it fits in your stack. It's being part of the furniture.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you're doing that at that workflow level. It's not, like you said, it's not output. To me, it's more workflow and use case.
The outputs need to be there, or you can't justify spending the money. And so, we're experimenting with a lower cost plan that's, in the $100 range where it's like, yeah, you can play around with it. You can send 20 emails a day. It's low risk. It's not meant for people to do campaigns at scale. It's really meant for like a very micro campaign strategy. But, at that level, if you've worked it into your workflow where like every Monday you have your coffee, you find 100 people in your leads from 6 months ago that you wanted to follow up with, you drop them in Skip and off you go, will be part of your stack forever. Whereas if it's like 11x or some of these bigger ones, it's like, oh, it's $5,000 a month. You got to pay for 12 months at a time, right? There's no outs, there's no backsies, right? It becomes harder to get on, and it also becomes a much faster trigger when you're like, no, this doesn't work. Like, I don't need to spend 60 grand a year on this tool.
Yeah. And how are you finding, like, educating your current customers on those additional use cases, right? Because I imagine that that's one way for you to kind of expand with your customers is to say, I mean, just what you said there, right? Like these micro campaigns, it's almost like can you keep that closed lost column warm almost? Right. Like there's that kind of campaign. There's that post-event follow-up, which before speaking to you last time, I hadn't really thought of that. And it's something that I hated doing.
It's actually like one of the biggest. So the best campaigns we've ever run before we even built our own software, we're using other people's software. The best campaigns are these like event focused. It depends on the product and the company, but we've seen over most companies, if you're going to an event that's got your ICP at it, your email outreach before that event is always going to outperform, especially if you have a brand in the space, right? Because if you got for a Coil, if you were going to Dreamforce, or you were going to the HubSpot conference, you're going to TechCrunch, right? And you reach out to people, hey, we help you with retention. Is that an issue? People will be like, oh, I'd love to meet, stop by the booth, right? It's super effective, but it's not like you're not emailing like 10,000 people, right? Like you're only emailing 500, 1,000, right? And that's what makes it effective because you've chosen like not the vendors, but or maybe in your case the vendors, but like not necessarily the vendors attending the conference, but like this narrow, like, oh, these are my ICP. And then the follow-up is a pain too, right? It's like, oh, okay, great. You had 200 people stop by the booth. Like, are you really going to sit down and write 200 emails on Monday? Like, no, nobody does. Right? Even the salesperson with the best intentions writes emails until they get a response. And then they stop and they start dealing with the responses because they'd much rather talk to a human than send another 162 emails that are probably not going to get read or responded to. And so, our software, like you just take that list, with some notes from the conference, you drop it in, it writes the emails, it writes the follow-ups. And what's interesting is like, is that the same value as like a $5K a month evergreen, send tens of thousands of emails and get meetings with strangers? I would argue it's almost higher value, right? Because that 200 people or 100 people that stop by your booth, like there's probably if there aren't 5 or 10 deals in that pile of leads, you're doing something wrong. Like they're bigger problems.
Yeah. Shouldn't be at that event.
Right. No, I mean, which happens. But, my point is like, if you're not, if you found the tree, like you spend all that money finding trees to shake, if you don't really shake the tree hard, and that's kind of where these micro campaigns fit in, is it's like, look, if you're walking around, you don't need to shake every tree in the forest, like shake a couple trees and see if anything comes out. That's like your outbound micro campaign. But once you found a tree that looks like it's worth shaking, like shake it really hard, like a conference. And the tools that are out there are just kind of the wrong tool, right? They're made for shaking the whole orchard or something. Like this analogy falls apart eventually, but.
No, I follow. And I think it's really interesting that, we've kind of come to this point that it's almost come full circle, right? Where you have the capacity and the capability to reach pretty much anybody everywhere all the time, and how ineffective that has become. If it takes 1 million emails to get one meeting, like, yikes, like that, the math on that seems like really scary to me. So the idea of micro campaigns, both like before and after the sale, I think that's really, really interesting to me, is like as a relationship maintenance thing as well, where, like you said, you go to events, you're inevitably going to, if you've done it before, you're going to run into people that customers will be there. I can see you cobbling together a bunch of micro campaigns to these different little audiences and having a lot more impact than sending that mass email out. It's like, nice to see.
Yeah, like thanks for stopping by the booth that nobody ever clicked on or read, with like all the pictures. And I think that. Yeah,
it's like I scanned your badge as you ran past.
Yeah, because you wanted the free squishy or whatever. Yeah, I think that exactly. It's something that's interesting in there that you talk about. I think that the notion of what we found was that our customers, before we started the AI thing, would ask us to use our cold outbound email infrastructure that we'd set up for them to email their existing customers because they didn't have a good solution for that, or email cold leads that they didn't have, even though they were in HubSpot or in their CRM and they could have used other tools. They liked our emails better. They liked sort of the cadences better, like the automation better. And it's all, HubSpot's deliverability is really terrible. Like it's all better than HubSpot. But I think what was interesting is like now, I use it to email people that I, signed up on the waitlist 2 months ago. It's like, why would I email them by hand? Like there are hundreds of them. Like I'll just, put a campaign together. It's like May waitlist signups, fire that off and see what comes out of the tree. And it's still a personal email. I think that the analogy that we're both very familiar with vibe coding tools like the Lovables, Bolts, Replets of the world. And there really isn't fully that analogy in sales yet. Like, you can use ChatGPT to edit stuff. You can use Gamma to build decks, although I have yet to build a deck in Gamma that didn't suck horribly. I don't know. Everybody says it's great, but my experience with the product has been substantially less than great. But my point is, like if you were founder and you're like, oh, I need to build this new feature, right? You used to like tell your engineering manager, hey, we need this feature, or maybe a product manager. They would go, now you tell Bolt, like, hey, build a SEM strategy or build an SEM landing page or whatever, right?
Yeah.
For sales, that doesn't exist. And I think part of the analogy is like you get back from the conference and you're like, you tell your sales team to follow up with people. Hey, follow up with the leads, right? Or tell your assistant, follow up with these 200 leads that came by the booth. Maybe Skip is that AI solution that does that. Would have been a human in the past task, right? Like, hey, go through and send follow-up emails to these 200 people.
How do you think about building a product then that kind of sits in this, they're not edge cases, but right, like, so someone's got HubSpot, which has the capability, right? You can have, what doesn't HubSpot do now? But basically, you've got your CRM, you can have your marketing stuff working as well. Skip comes in. This is an interesting area to me as companies like HubSpot just grow to attempt to do almost everything, right? They've gone into customer health scores now, but yet I find everyone I talk to says like, yeah, it's not great. And then you mentioned the email deliverability's not great.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah. And so how do you think about just from a founder and like product owner perspective, this is really interesting to me, of like you're not really building on top of these platforms, but you're providing these use cases that fit on top of them. Do you see any risk in that? Do you see any, like, how do you look at the opportunity of that? I'll spin it in a positive way.
Yeah, so I'll answer it in two ways. I think the first way is just straight, I view it as just a bigger market, right? Whenever HubSpot rolls out a new feature, they only do that when there's a big market for it and people are nipping at their heels, and it just creates awareness for it. I think everybody knows HubSpot's feature for anything is always like the second, third, or fifth best, right? Even made the top 10. And so where it matters, where performance matters, it's usually better to get the third-party tool versus use the HubSpot, at least common denominator tool. Not that it's bad, right?
Yeah.
And so for some things like sending marketing emails, I'd much rather have it all integrated with my CRM, with my website, so I can just push the button and send the email, not have to think about it. Sure, maybe, Beehive or some other tool would give you a 5% higher open rate, but like it's not worth the incremental lift versus just using the built-in HubSpot tool. And that's true for a lot of what HubSpot does, right? But for things that really matter, like email outbound, maybe like, customer health scoring, right? Things that really are important, and performance matter, not that all of these things are important, but where performance is really critical, I think it just drives awareness. It's like, oh, I have this problem. HubSpot obviously thinks it's important enough. to have a feature for it. Let's shop around and see what else is out there and could it be better? The second way to answer the question is an analogy. When we did Perfect Price, we ended up in the vacation rental space. And the thing that shocked me was the companies. So we would partner with the property management system, which is like the system of record. It's like the equivalent of your HubSpot for a SaaS company is your property management system or software for your vacation rental manager. And I thought that the ones that had price management built in would be terrible prospects to work with because they obviously have price management built in. So why would you pay tens of thousands of dollars for another software solution to do the same thing? And it turned out those were always our best leads because those people had usually, for a variety of reasons, they chose that property management system because they cared about pricing and they wanted to control it. And then they were disappointed with the tools that were provided. Or they didn't care, but they pitched, that product like pushed them into using it. So then they started caring and then they were disappointed with the capabilities. And so, if it was flawlessly and perfectly executed, I'm sure it would be tough to pull people away from it. But I think when it's executed not perfectly, right, and there's a big gap or where there are use cases that are left out, it just creates a bigger market, right? So now, I toyed around with the HubSpot. I mean, a lot of our customers use HubSpot to send cold emails and they perform terribly. And so if you can convince them at least that it was HubSpot's fault and not their fault, they'll give it another shot. Right? And it's one of our clients, they got an 8% open rate. It's sort of like, why even bother? I've got other clients that have gotten almost kicked out of Google because their HubSpot, some sales guy was sending 3,000 emails a month through HubSpot, getting 0 responses and being marked as spam all the time. And then they're like, well, cold email doesn't work or cold outbound doesn't work. And it's like, or maybe you're using the wrong tool. And so it's a balance, but overall to me, it just shows that there's a big market for these solutions. And when HubSpot integrates one, assuming they didn't nail it, which they've certainly never done on the first try. I do really like their CRM. I should say, not to knock HubSpot too much. Like their CRM is a huge improvement over Salesforce or other things that are out there. And it's great to have it all integrated. But I think it's not that hard, especially in the era of vibe coding and Zapier to integrate stuff.
Yeah. I've heard much more stinging critiques of HubSpot. So we use it too. So it's just one of those things that's kind of like, start a company, use HubSpot now. But that's true. I mean, our experience, co-founders started a company on the Atlassian marketplace. It's the same sort of thing, right? Like a big company, they will go 80% and that leaves you that 20% or that last mile, whatever you want to call it, to provide value to people. And it's a totally viable way to build a business. And like you said, awareness is such a huge thing. And if you can piggyback off of someone else.
Yeah, I think it's great from an awareness standpoint. I mean, one other story, a friend of mine started Life 360. We met when I was doing another thing and I couldn't figure out go to market for it. And it was another mobile app. It was in the top 20, but just commercially it wasn't doing as well as we wanted it to. And I was like, how did you do it? And he's like, well, I didn't really. Like we were doing all the stuff you're doing and it was working just as badly as it was for you. Verizon launched their family tracker and spent hundreds of millions of dollars marketing it to every Verizon subscriber. And every Verizon subscriber knew it sucked and immediately went into the App Store and searched for family tracker. And we were the first search result. And so we ended up with millions and millions of downloads a week from thousands. And it wasn't anything we did. It was because Verizon put a bunch of wood behind the bat and created a category that we'd been trying to create for 2 years unsuccessfully. And so I think some of it's when you get into one of these, I mean, obviously if they were third in the store, they would not have ridden the wave quite as well as they did. You did a lot of things right to be there. But if you have a mediocre solution and HubSpot is a mediocre solution, nobody's going to leave HubSpot, go to the extra difficulty to integrate your mediocre solution. But I do think that there's this huge opportunity to kind of ride that wave when it comes out, but you do have to execute, right? Your product does actually have to be demonstrably better, and that depends on HubSpot's also not being that good.
I suppose so, yeah. But I guess it makes it probably fun as a product owner because it means that you've got to keep pushing yourself, and it's not just build it and set it and forget it sort of thing. So you'll constantly be. Yeah,
iterating. I mean, I think there's this notion of it's an interesting balance. There's this notion of I don't know if you want to call it keeping up with the Joneses, but the competitive iteration. And what I've found is that, if they launch some feature and it's their direct competitors and people are picking you off, you do need to be aware of what the competition's doing. But we're not a venture-backed company, and nor do we, I think, want to be. We want to be a $5 or $10 million a year ARR company, but you can do that if you focus on a niche and you focus on really over-delivering for that niche. And then it starts to matter less what other people are doing just for competition's sake and more would my users benefit from that feature, having seen that it's possible because somebody else did it first. We wouldn't do it just because they did it or just HubSpot launched this thing. Should we do it because HubSpot did it? It's more Oh, well, that's an interesting take that maybe was on the roadmap or maybe wasn't. If it wasn't, like, is there a reason? Should we put it on the roadmap, or is it something we should consider? So I think the more specific you can be as a product owner with who your customers are and what they care about, the more the competition can just be one more input in terms of like brainstorming ideas that might help your customers versus living in an anxiety, like fear-based, like, oh my God, OpenAI just did that, like Claude, we have to ship this thing, right? I mean, it's a thing. I'm not saying it's not right for some companies, but I aspire to being in a spot where we're differentiated enough and have solved that problem well enough that just because somebody has a bell or whistle that we haven't built or haven't built yet doesn't cause instant churn.
Yeah, right. Right. We're kind of coming up on time. I've got a part of the show that we're doing. It's kind of like you're going to pay it forward sort of thing. So I've got a question from a previous guest that I'm going to ask you. And then at the end of that, you're going to ask you to ask a future guest a question. It can be anything about SaaS business, whatever you want it to be. So the question I have for you today is from Derek Skletsky. He's currently the chief product officer at a company called community.com. And his question is, and this is a bit of a hairy one, so I hope you're ready. The question is, who owns Churn? And I'm going to stop there. And so inside of a SaaS company, who owns Churn?
It's a great question. I mean, I think ultimately the CEO owns everything on some level. So it just kind of feels like a cop-out answer. So I think it depends on the company. I mean, if it isn't the CEO, it depends on, I would say probably product leadership, probably the CPO if they have one, because it depends, right? If it's a product-led growth company where the product is kind of doing its own growth and those tools are baked in, then 100% product. I think when you get into the sort of trickier territory, it's where you have salespeople that might be overpromising or, targeting the wrong companies and getting them to sign up, and then those people churn because they have the product isn't built for them or what have you. And that's why I think ultimately the only answer I'm 100% confident is the CEO, because they're the ones who can take responsibility for sales and marketing and product. But I would say if I were really pressed and it couldn't be the CEO, I would say the CPO.
Do you think someone has to sort of be like, you have to like put that Post-it on someone's chest almost to say like, this is your responsibility?
I heavily disagree with that. I don't think, taking a step back, like I think the best way to do it is like no one person owns Churn, right? I remember we pitched Macy's once and at the pricing company, and we had this data on, we had a bunch of interesting data. Anyway, we pitched this big group of VPs at Macy's, and I'm happy to throw them under the bus because they deserve it. And one of the things we did is our tool could look at conversion rate by product on the web page. So it was really hard to do in e-commerce at the time, but you could see like by price and product, how were people converting on this page. And we talked about this in the meeting, and one of the VPs pointed to another VP and was like, a conversion rate isn't my problem, it's his problem, right? And it was like, well, no wonder you're going out of business. Like if that's your attitude towards like a core company performance metric that affects everybody. And then if you think about the downstream effects of that mindset, like, oh, well then you're just going to send emails to loyal customers. Like why would you ever add anybody to your email list? Because your conversion rate will be higher. If that guy owns the email list, it'll cripple the business and all these people will die eventually because no young people shop at Macy's. But like we'll just keep going back to the well where we can keep our conversion rate high and cash our bonus check because like the other person has the problem of growing the business, not me. And so I think that's why, specifically Amazon is so successful because they don't allow any of that nonsense of like, oh, this isn't my metric, so I don't have to care about it. And I think like the idea that like just one person is responsible for churn, like on the executive team, if the CPO is the one who keeps an eye on the dashboard, that's different than like, oh, the product manager doesn't really have to think about it because it's a sales problem, or the sales guy the VP of sales doesn't have to think about it because it's a product problem. Like I think, everybody's still responsible for churn. It's better that than the other way around because you end up with some pretty questionable behavior.
Yeah, well, you basically end up with that Spider-Man meme, right? Where everyone's just all the Spider-Man pointing at all the other Spider-Men.
Right.
Like that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's yours, right?
Yeah, and I think it's it's crippling from a company building standpoint.
Great answer. Are there any questions that or a particular question that you would like to throw at a future guest?
Yeah, I think just a general question of like, what do you spend your time on every week would be a fun one. I've been reflecting on that a bunch. And yeah, it's just interesting to hear. I think a lot of the success of companies is down to like the actual footwork of the executives and the founders. Like, what do they really spend their time on? And I'm curious, like what is your next guess?
That's a great question. Yeah. Have you done anything to sort of analyze that for yourself?
I do from time to time, and I'm always disappointed. And like, but you walk the dogs. Like that was a great use of time, but somebody had to do it.
Well, you can always be talking to ChatGPT while you do that.
Well, what's interesting to me is when what I spend my time on, I won't say you, but when I spend my time on things that I'm not aligned with, like right now, we're heavily focused on customer acquisition and customer retention. I guess one is always focused on those things. But as we start to accrue more customers, I realized like I need to spend more time on those customers versus the first couple of customers, we didn't really spend much time on acquisition at all. We were just like, oh, we need to make sure these guys are successful, learn what we can, build out the stuff that we maybe faked and didn't build enough of yet, right? And so now that we're kind of coming to the end of that phase where most of the stuff is there, most of it should work, I went back and I was like, okay, great, we need more customers, spending time on that. But as the new customers come in, I realized like, me vibe coding my own CRM because I want to figure out who I need to email this week, which by the way, I did and works pretty well. Like it's like, is this the best use of my time? Like, I don't know. I think maybe I should be reaching out to those, so that's why to me, it's interesting to hear how people do it because I think it's sort of a hidden cause of success. I don't know if you saw Base 44, but solo founder, sold for 80 million, never hired anybody relatively recently. And I thought what was interesting was like, I would love to know what he did every day, like down to the hour. Like, what were you actually doing? Like, did you eat lunch at your desk? Did you vibe code that? How much of this solar founder was truly solo versus like I had 3 agencies that did a bunch of stuff for me, right? And how did you actually manage the time and how much time did you spend actually working? I think are all interesting questions.
Agree 100%. That's a good one to pass on. So thank you. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where would you like people to go and connect with you? Is LinkedIn the best place or where
LinkedIn is great. You can find everything at silverwood.ai. That's sort of my like personal holding company and it has LinkedIn, the podcast I used to do a bunch of other stuff linked to from it. And then skip.ai. If you're a founder and you want to talk go to market, feel free to reach out in either place. I love talking to founders and helping them figure out how to sell more and how to retain people.
This has been fun, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for listening. My key takeaways from this conversation with Alex today is that micro campaigns beat mass emails. I think that's something that we'll start trying more of, being highly targeted, being very deliberate about messaging the ICP, our ICP. I would encourage you to do the same. I think it's really interesting, the idea of becoming part of the workflow. So if you're building a product, selling a product, are you part of the workflow? Are you part of use cases, not just a results machine? I think that's an interesting insight that if you're tied to results and you're not built into workflows and day-to-day ways of working with people, that you might be on the chopping block. And of course, the spicy question at the end, who owns Churn? As he said, everyone owns Churn. If you had to pick one, it's the CEO. But really, I think it does come down, and I agree with Alex on this, it comes down to company by company, product by product, and it has to be a team effort. And HubSpot, if they are entering your market, or if a big player is entering your market, that's actually good news. We talk with a lot of companies, and we ourselves were building on the Atlassian marketplace and always found that if the giant in the space is talking about it, that's a positive thing for everybody. They create awareness. Well, you can go and deliver the high performance, the really top-end quality products. There's room for everybody in there. If you want to find more of Alex's work, you can go to silverwood.ai or skip.ai. That's SKYP.ai. He loves helping founders nail their go-to-market and their retention. Had a lot of good conversations with Alex. I really enjoy talking with him, whether or not we're recording. Thanks so much for listening to Retain or Die. See you next time.